He never expected his quiet life in Cedar Grove to explode into a showdown that would shake a small town to its core. But when the Shadow Serpents motorcycle gang decided to target the man in the wheelchair, they had no idea they were poking at the military's most dangerous ghost. Ryan Mitchell had vanished from the world of black ops and classified missions, burying his lethal skills beneath the facade of a disabled veteran. The wheelchair wasn't a lie. The explosion in that classified compound had taken his legs. But what these thugs didn't realize was that they were taunting a man who'd spent years as the government's most effective combat specialist. They saw what they wanted to see: weakness, vulnerability, an easy target. They harassed him at Joe's diner, vandalized the Veterans Center, threatened his friends. But when their leader, Blaze, made the mistake of targeting young Evan and his mother, something awakened in Ryan that he'd tried to leave behind. In less than a week, the Shadow Serpents would learn a brutal lesson about judging books by their covers, as their empire of fear crumbled before a man they'd dismissed as broken. What followed would become whispered legend in Cedar Grove, as one man's reluctant return to violence would transform a town paralyzed by fear into a community united against evil. Before we dive deeper into this story, tell us in the comments where you are tuning in from today, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rhythmic squeak of wheelchair wheels echoed through the pre-dawn silence of Cedar Grove's main street. Ryan Mitchell pushed himself forward with practiced efficiency, his muscled arms flexing beneath a worn gray hoodie. The chair's left wheel caught slightly on a crack in the sidewalk, a familiar bump he'd memorized months ago. Like everything else in his carefully ordered world, Ryan had mapped every imperfection in his daily route. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when he reached Joe's diner, right on schedule at 5:45 a.m. The neon open sign cast a red glow across his weathered features as he masterfully maneuvered his chair up the gentle slope of the entrance ramp, one he convinced Joe to install last winter with quiet persistence rather than citing the ADA. "Morning, Ryan." Joe's gravelly voice carried from behind the counter. "Coffee's fresh." Ryan wheeled to his usual spot, table 7, where he could observe both the entrance and the kitchen door while keeping his back to the wall. "Thanks, Joe." "The usual. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, turkey bacon." "Coming right up." Joe didn't need to write it down. Ryan had ordered the same breakfast every morning for the past 18 months. As Ryan sipped his coffee, he watched the town wake up through the streaked diner windows. Mrs. Chen unlocking her flower shop across the street. Old Bill sweeping the sidewalk in front of the hardware store. The familiar rhythm of small-town life unfolding like a well-worn book. "Here you go, brother." Joe set down the plate, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Like Ryan, Joe had served, though in different wars, different decades. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition of the weight both men carried. "You sleep okay?" Ryan's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Same as always." Joe nodded, understanding the meaning behind those 3 words. They both knew about the nights when sleep came in fragments, interrupted by memories that refused to fade. The breakfast rush began trickling in as Ryan finished his meal. Sarah Thompson, the elementary school teacher, waved as she picked up her morning coffee. Her 7-year-old daughter Emma darted over to Ryan's table. "Mr. Ryan, look what I made." She thrust a crayon drawing toward him, stick figures in various colors. "That's beautiful, Emma. Is that your class?" "Uh-huh. And look, I drew you too." She pointed to a figure in what was unmistakably meant to be a wheelchair. Sarah called her daughter back, mouthing an apology to Ryan. He shook his head slightly, indicating none was needed. Children's honesty was refreshing. They saw the chair as just another part of who he was, not a tragedy to tiptoe around. The bell above the door chimed, and Lila Matthews entered with her son, Evan, in tow. The boy's face lit up when he spotted Ryan. "Mom, can I say hi to Mr. Ryan?" "Please." Lila smiled, her tired eyes crinkling at the corners. "Just for a minute, honey. We need to get you to school." Evan bounded over, his Batman backpack bouncing. At 9 years old, he was all energy and enthusiasm. "Mr. Ryan, did you watch the chess video I sent you?" "I did." Ryan's voice was gentle, a tone reserved for few people. "That was an impressive queen's sacrifice. Want to try it out of the center this afternoon?" "Yeah." "Mom, can we go to the Veterans Center after school?" Lila approached, resting a hand on her son's shoulder. "If you finish your homework first." She met Ryan's eyes. "Thanks for teaching him chess. It's all he talks about lately." "He's a natural strategist," Ryan replied. "Just needs to work on his patience." The moment was interrupted by the rumble of motorcycles outside, a sound that made several diner patrons tense visibly. Through the window, Ryan watched as 3 bikes pulled up in front of Chen's Flowers. The riders dismounted with practiced arrogance, their leather jackets emblazoned with the Shadow Serpents emblem, a twisted snake wrapped around a dagger. "We should go," Lila said quietly, drawing Evan closer. "Don't want to be late for school," Ryan observed as the bikers entered the flower shop. Mrs. Chen's face was visible through the window, her usually cheerful expression replaced by barely concealed fear. The leader, a tall man with a shaved head and a beard streaked with gray, leaned across her counter with casual menace. Joe appeared at Ryan's table, coffee pot in hand. "Third time this week," he muttered. "They're getting bolder. How much are they taking her for?" Ryan's voice was neutral, but his eyes never left the scene across the street. "Started at $200 a week for protection. Heard they just doubled it." Joe's knuckles were white around the coffee pot handle. "Cops say they can't do anything without proof." Ryan watched as Mrs. Chen opened her register with trembling hands. The transaction took less than a minute, but the message was clear. The Shadow Serpents owned these streets. After paying his bill, Ryan wheeled out into the morning sun. The bikers were mounting up, their leader counting bills with a satisfied smirk. As Ryan crossed the street, an elderly woman with a cane was making her way toward the crosswalk. "Let me help you, Mrs. Patterson," Ryan offered, recognizing his neighbor. "Oh, thank you, dear. These old legs aren't what they used to be." They were halfway across when the roar of engines filled the air. The Shadow Serpents accelerated past, deliberately close, their slipstream causing Mrs. Patterson to stumble. Ryan's hand shot out with unexpected speed, steadying her before she could fall. The bikers circled back, engines growling. Their leader, whom Ryan had heard called Blaze, pulled up alongside them. "Watch yourself, old lady," Blaze called out, his voice carrying artificial concern. "Streets are dangerous these days." His eyes fell on Ryan, taking in the wheelchair with obvious amusement. "You two wheels. Hate to see anything happen to such an upstanding citizen." Ryan met his gaze without flinching, saying nothing. There was something in that steady stare that made Blaze's smile falter for just a moment, a hardness that seemed at odds with the man in the wheelchair. "What's wrong, tough guy? Cat got your tongue?" One of Blaze's lieutenants, a younger man with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck, revved his engine. Ryan continued to stare, his face impassive. Finally, Blaze spat on the ground near Ryan's wheel. "Come on, boys. Let's leave the cripple to his good deeds." The gang roared away, their laughter echoing off the storefronts. Mrs. Patterson clutched Ryan's shoulder. "Those men are dangerous, Ryan," she whispered. "I've seen what they do to people who stand up to them. Please stay away from them." Ryan patted her hand gently. "Let's get you to the other side, Mrs. Patterson." Once he'd seen her safely to the sidewalk, Ryan made his way back to his apartment above the old bookstore. The building wasn't exactly wheelchair-friendly, but he'd adapted, installing a small elevator in the freight entrance at his own expense. Inside his sparse living room, Ryan's movements became more fluid, more purposeful. He went to the bookshelf and removed a wooden box from behind a row of military history texts. Opening it revealed a small, well-polished coin. The insignia was unlike any standard military decoration, a combination of symbols that would mean nothing to most observers. Ryan ran his thumb over the coin's surface, his mind drifting to places and times he'd tried to leave behind. The coin was a reminder of who he had been, who he still was beneath the careful facade of disability and dependence. A commotion outside drew his attention. Through his window, he could see the Shadow Serpents had regrouped in the parking lot behind the diner. Blaze was holding court, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "This town's getting too comfortable," he was saying. "People are forgetting who's in charge. Maybe we need to remind them." He gestured toward the diner. "That guy in the wheelchair, did you see how he looked at us? Like he was better than us. Want us to teach him some manners, boss?" Snake Tattoo asked eagerly. Blaze's grin was predatory. "Not yet, but keep an eye on him. Could be fun to have a new punching bag around here." Show everyone what happens when you don't show proper respect. From his window, Ryan watched the exchange without expression. His hand still rested on the coin, its surface warm from his touch. In the reflection of the glass, his eyes had changed, no longer those of a disabled veteran, but of something else entirely. Something dangerous. The Shadow Serpents mounted their bikes and rode off, confident in their dominion over Cedar Grove. They didn't notice the slight smile that crossed Ryan's face. A smile that held no warmth, no humor, only the patient anticipation of a predator who knows the hunt has begun. In his apartment, Ryan wheeled to his desk and opened his laptop. The screen displayed a message from an encrypted email account. Things heating up in Cedar Grove. Need your skills. Ready to come back? Ryan closed the laptop without responding. He'd chosen this quiet life for a reason. Tried to leave the violence behind. But as he listened to the fading rumble of motorcycles, he knew that sometimes the fight finds you, whether you're looking for it or not. The coin gleamed in the morning sun, its mysterious insignia a reminder of capabilities that lay dormant but not forgotten. Ryan Mitchell had built a life of careful routine and measured interactions. But beneath that facade lay the most lethal combat specialist the military had ever produced. The Shadow Serpents were about to learn that some wolves come disguised as sheep, and some predators hunt from wheelchairs. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Joe's diner's windows, painting the checkered floor in alternating patterns of light and dark. Ryan sat at his usual table, savoring the last bits of his meatloaf special. The dinner crowd was starting to filter in. Families with kids fresh from after-school activities, elderly couples taking advantage of the early bird menu, and the usual mix of regulars who made the diner their second home. Jenny, the evening shift waitress, stopped by his table with a fresh cup of coffee. "Can I get you anything else, Ryan?" "Marie made apple pie today." "Thanks, Jenny, but I'm good." Ryan offered a small smile. "Just finishing up?" The peaceful atmosphere shattered with the thunderous arrival of motorcycles outside. The familiar rumble of custom exhaust pipes made conversations stop mid-sentence. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer. The elderly couple by the window quickly asked for their check. The bell above the door chimed, a gentle sound that seemed absurdly delicate compared to what followed. Blaze strutted in first, his leather vest adorned with new patches since Ryan had last seen him. Behind him came 5 other Shadow Serpents, including Snake Tattoo and a massive man everyone called Bear. "Evening, folks." Blaze's voice boomed through the diner with artificial cheer. "Don't let us interrupt your meals. We're just here for some of Joe's famous coffee." Ryan continued eating, his movements measured and deliberate. He could feel the tension in the room, rising like a tide. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Joe emerge from the kitchen, dish towel gripped tight in his weathered hands. The bikers spread out, claiming the counter seats with theatrical casualness. Bear's weight made the stool groan in protest. Snake Tattoo drummed his fingers on the counter, the sound like ammunition being fed into a chamber. Well, Blaze's voice carried across the diner. "Look who we have here, boys. Our friend from the crosswalk." Ryan took another bite of meatloaf, chewing slowly. The other patrons seemed to be holding their breath. "Hey, Wheels," Snake Tattoo called out. "Boss is talking to you. Didn't your mama teach you any manners?" Ryan set down his fork, dabbed his mouth with a napkin, and took a sip of coffee. His composure seemed to irritate Blaze, who stood up and sauntered over to Ryan's table. "You know," Blaze leaned down, placing both hands on the table's surface. "Where I come from, when somebody talks to you, you answer." His breath smelled of cigarettes and cheap whiskey. Ryan finally looked up, meeting Blaze's gaze with the same steady stare from the crosswalk incident. "I'm just trying to finish my dinner." "Oh, he does speak." Blaze straightened up, playing to his audience. "And here we thought maybe whatever put you in that chair took your voice too." The other gang members laughed on cue. Bear's deep chuckle sounded like rocks in a tumbler. "Tell me something, Wheels," Blaze continued, beginning to circle Ryan's table like a shark. "How does a guy like you end up in a chair anyway? Drunk driving? Bad accident? Or maybe," he paused for effect, "maybe you're just another broken soldier who couldn't hack it in the real world?" Ryan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, quick as lightning, gone just as fast. A nearby teenager had his phone out, recording the scene. His mother quickly pushed his hand down, shaking her head in warning. No comment. Blaze stopped behind Ryan's chair. That's okay. Actions speak louder than words anyway. What happened next seemed like an accident to most observers. Blaze took a step forward, apparently tripping over his own feet. His hand shot out to catch his balance, knocking Ryan's plate off the table. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and gravy splattered across the floor and Ryan's pants. Oh man, I am so sorry. Blaze's voice dripped with mock sincerity. How clumsy of me. Here, let me help you clean that up. He grabbed a handful of napkins and made a show of dropping them on Ryan's lap. It's fine, Ryan said quietly, already starting to clean himself off. Just an accident. See how understanding he is, boys? Blaze grinned. A real gentleman. He pretended to help clean up, deliberately smearing more gravy across Ryan's shirt. Jenny appeared with a washcloth. I'll take care of this, Ryan. No. Blaze waved her away. We got this handled. Right, Wheels? His hand gripped Ryan's shoulder hard enough to leave bruises. Joe's voice cut through the tension. That's enough. Either order something or leave. Blaze straightened up, his friendly mask slipping for a moment to reveal something ugly underneath. Or what, old man? You gonna make us? Just saying this is a place of business. Joe held his ground, but his face had gone pale. Not a playground. A playground? Blaze's eyes lit up with malicious inspiration. Now there's an idea. Hey, Wheels, when's the last time you went for a spin? Before anyone could react, Blaze grabbed the handles of Ryan's wheelchair and yanked backward. The chair tipped, and Ryan went sprawling onto the floor. Several people gasped. A child started crying. But something strange happened during the fall, something only a trained eye might have noticed. Ryan's body moved with unexpected coordination, his arms positioning perfectly to break his fall, his head tucking to protect his neck. It wasn't the awkward tumble of a disabled man, but the controlled fall of someone with combat training. The moment passed quickly. Ryan lay on his side, surrounded by spilled food and overturned furniture. His wheelchair had skidded several feet away. Somebody help him up. A woman's voice called from the back of the diner. Stay in your seats. Bear growled, and everyone froze. Jenny knelt beside Ryan, her hand gentle on his arm. Are you okay? She whispered. Should I call someone? Ryan shook his head slightly. Using his arms, he began pulling himself toward his overturned chair with deliberate movements. Look at him go. Snake Tattoo laughed. Like a seal on the beach. That's enough. Joe's voice cracked like a whip. He had come around the counter, fury evident in every line of his face. Get out of my diner. Blaze turned to face him, all pretense of friendliness gone. Or what? Vietnam? You gonna call the cops? Think they'll get here before we redecorate this place. He gestured around the diner. Before we teach everyone here what happens when they don't mind their own business. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Joe's hands were shaking, but he didn't back down. Meanwhile, Ryan had reached his chair. With smooth, practiced movements, he righted it and began the process of pulling himself up. Jenny tried to help, but he gently pushed her hands away. Let him do it himself, Blaze commanded. Man's got to learn to be independent. Right, boys? The gang's laughter felt like broken glass in the air. Ryan got himself seated, adjusted his legs, and smoothed down his soiled shirt. His movements were unhurried, almost peaceful. Nothing to say, Wheels? Blaze leaned in close again. No tough guy stare this time. Ryan looked at him for a long moment, then turned to Jenny. Thank you for dinner. It was excellent. He pulled out his wallet and placed money on the table, including a generous tip. Have a good evening, everyone. With that, he wheeled himself toward the door. His departure was punctuated by more laughter and a few parting jeers from the gang. Look at him run away. Roll away, you mean? Come back tomorrow, Wheels. We'll work on your dismounts. Outside, the evening air had grown cool. Ryan paused on the ramp, looking up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Behind him, he could hear Blaze's voice through the open door. See, boys? Nothing but a broken man. Can't even stand up for himself. More laughter. I think we found our new entertainment. This town's been boring lately. Time to liven things up a bit. Ryan wheeled himself home in the gathering darkness. The street lamps were just beginning to flicker on, casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. A few people who had witnessed the scene at the diner watched him pass, their faces showing a mixture of pity and shame at their own inaction. In his apartment, Ryan's movements became more fluid, more natural. He went to his bedroom and changed out of his soiled clothes with military precision. There would be bruises tomorrow. Blaze's grip had been strong, and the fall, controlled as it was, had still impacted with force. From his dresser drawer, Ryan retrieved an old photograph. The edges were worn smooth from handling, but the image was clear: 12 men in combat gear, standing in front of a helicopter. Their faces were hard, competent, dangerous. In the center stood Ryan, then Captain Ryan Mitchell, his stance radiating authority and lethal capability. "I left that behind for a reason," he whispered to the empty room, running his thumb over the faces of his former team members. 3 of them were dead now. 2 more were still in the game, doing the kind of work that governments never acknowledge. The sound of motorcycles roaring past his window made him look up. The Shadow Serpents were leaving the diner, probably headed to whatever den they called home. Their laughter floated up like poison on the evening breeze. Ryan wheeled to his window and watched them disappear around the corner. His reflection in the glass showed a different man than the one in the photograph. Older, quieter, contained. But in his eyes, something was stirring, like a sleeping predator beginning to wake. He placed the photograph face down on his desk and went through his evening routine with mechanical precision. Brush teeth, check doors, position chair for easy morning transfer. But his mind was elsewhere, in places he'd tried to forget, training grounds where he'd learned to kill in 100 different ways, battlefields where he'd put those skills to use, classified locations where he'd done things that would never appear in any official record. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Ryan's hand drifted to the scar on his abdomen, the one that had put him in the chair. The doctors had called it a miracle he survived. His commanding officer had called it a waste of talent. Ryan had called it an opportunity to walk away from the violence that had defined his life. But violence, he knew, had a way of finding you. No matter how far you run, how well you hide, it seeks you out like a bloodhound on a scent. The Shadow Serpents had no idea what they'd started today. They saw a broken man in a wheelchair. They never stopped to ask what had broken him, or what he might have been before. In the darkness of his bedroom, Ryan allowed himself a small smile. Not of happiness, but of grim anticipation. He had chosen peace, chosen to leave the killing behind. But if violence insisted on finding him again, well, he still remembered every lesson, every technique, every way to end a fight permanently. The coin from his military days sat on his nightstand, its mysterious insignia catching the moonlight. Next to it lay his phone, screen dark but memory full of encrypted contacts. People who could provide whatever equipment or intelligence he might need, no questions asked. But those were thoughts for another day. Tonight, Ryan would sleep the sleep of the patient predator, knowing that his time would come. The Shadow Serpents had marked him as prey, never suspecting they were poking at a wolf in sheep's clothing. Outside his window, Cedar Grove settled into its nighttime routine. Streets emptied, shops closed, lights went out one by one. Tomorrow would be another day of quiet routine and careful facade. But something had changed in the air, like the electric charge before a storm. The Shadow Serpents had sown the wind, and soon enough, they would reap the whirlwind. Ryan closed his eyes, his breathing settling into the rhythmic pattern taught by special operations training. His last thought before sleep took him was not of revenge or violence, but of peace. The peace he'd sought in this small town, the peace he'd have to sacrifice to protect it. In the darkness, the military coin gleamed like a promise, or a warning. The explosion ripped through Ryan's dreams like it had ripped through the compound that night. Fragments of memory burst behind his closed eyes. The green glow of night vision, the weight of his modified M4, the whispered commands over tactical comms. Shadow 1 in position. Shadow 2, northwest corner secured. Shadow 3, ready for breach. The mission had gone sideways almost immediately. Their intel was wrong. Instead of the expected skeleton crew, the compound was crawling with hostiles. But they were too deep to abort, the target too valuable to leave behind. In his nightmare, Ryan moved with the fluid grace of a predator, each motion economical and lethal. 3 tangos down before they knew what hit them. A 4th reaching for an alarm, stopped by Ryan's knife, thrown with surgical precision. The team flowing through the compound like death itself, leaving silence in their wake. Then the secondary explosion. Not from their charges, something else. The floor giving way beneath them. Ryan pushing two team members clear before the collapse. The searing pain as rebar punched through his lower back. The taste of blood and concrete dust. Captain's down. Need immediate evac. Multiple hostiles converging. Hold the perimeter. Do not let them reach the captain. Ryan jolted awake, his sheets soaked with sweat. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. His hands moved automatically to his legs. A habit formed in those first days after surgery when he'd still expected to feel them. The dream had been more vivid than usual, probably triggered by the incident at the diner. He hadn't thought about that night in months, had gotten good at pushing it away. But now the memories were bubbling up like blood from an old wound. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Not his civilian phone, but the secure satellite phone he kept charged out of old habit. Only 3 people had that number. The display showed Logan. Ryan let it ring twice more before answering. Little early for a social call. Still keeping banker's hours, Captain? Logan's voice was exactly as Ryan remembered it. Gravelly, amused, dangerous. Or should I say former captain? Just Ryan now. You know that. Maybe. But some things don't change. Some skills don't fade. Ryan pushed himself up, switching on the bedside lamp. Why are you calling, Logan? Got something cooking. Off the books. High priority. The kind of job that needs a special touch. A pause. Your touch. I'm out. Are you? Logan's tone shifted, became more serious. Word is there's trouble in your little hideaway. Local muscle causing problems. Bikers, I hear. Ryan's jaw tightened. You keeping tabs on me? Someone has to. You're too valuable to lose track of. Papers rustled in the background. This op, it's important, Ryan. People will die if we don't move on it. And you're still the best there is. Ryan corrected. I was the best. Now I'm just a guy trying to live quietly. Bullshit. Logan's voice hardened. The chair doesn't change who you are. What you can do. The team needs you. I'm done with violence, Logan. Found something else? Yeah? How's that working out for you? Heard about what happened at the diner. The old Ryan would never have taken that kind of disrespect. The old Ryan is dead. Died in that compound. Logan sighed, a sound full of disappointment and warning. You can leave the fight, brother, but the fight will find you. You know that better than anyone. When it does, give me a call. The line went dead. Ryan stared at the phone for a long moment before placing it back on the nightstand. Sleep wasn't coming back tonight. The Veteran Center was quiet at 7 a.m. Ryan wheeled through the front door, nodding to Marcus, the night security guard finishing his shift. Early bird today, Ryan, Marcus commented. Coffee's fresh if you want some. Thanks. Any trouble overnight? Quiet as a church, Marcus gathered his things, though those bikers rode past a few times, revving their engines, making noise. Ryan wheeled to the break room, where cardboard boxes waited to be filled with care packages. Each box would go to a veteran struggling to readjust to civilian life. Toiletries, non-perishable food, gift cards, handwritten notes of support. He was organizing supplies when he heard the front door open. Lila's voice carried down the hallway, followed by Evan's excited chatter. Mr. Ryan, are you here? Break room, Ryan called back. Evan bounded in, his energy filling the space. Mom said we could come early today. Can we play chess before I help with the packages? Lila appeared in the doorway. Only if Mr. Ryan isn't too busy. Never too busy for chess. Ryan smiled, one of his rare, genuine expressions. Help me set up the board? While Evan arranged the pieces, Ryan noticed Lila's concerned expression. Everything okay? She lowered her voice. We heard about what happened at the diner. Are you all right? Nothing hurt but my pride. Ryan moved his first pawn. Your move, Evan. The boy studied the board with intense concentration. Knight to f6. Good opening. Aggressive. Ryan countered with another pawn. Remember what we talked about, though. Control the center first. They played while Lila helped sort supplies for the care packages. Evan was improving, showing real tactical promise. When he captured Ryan's bishop, his face lit up with triumph. Did you see that, Mom? I trapped his bishop. Well done, honey. Lila smiled. But remember, we need to leave soon for school. Just 5 more minutes? Evan pleaded. I think I can checkmate him this time. Ryan was about to respond when his phone buzzed. His regular phone this time. A text from Joe. They were here again. Left you a message. I'm sorry. Game's going to have to wait, Ryan said, his voice carefully neutral. Something I need to check on? The graffiti was visible from half a block away. Bright red spray, paint across his apartment door and the surrounding wall. Broken Hero screamed in dripping letters, along with cruder messages and crude drawings. Mrs. Patterson from next door was wringing her hands in distress. Orion. I heard them last night, but I was too scared to call anyone. That awful man with the tattoos on his neck was leading them. It's okay, Mrs. Patterson. Ryan examined the damage with clinical detachment. Did you happen to see what time this was? Must have been around midnight. That young one, the quiet one with the brown hair. He seemed upset about it. I heard him arguing with the others. Ryan filed that information away. The gang wasn't completely united in their harassment. That could be useful. Around the corner, out of Mrs. Patterson's sight, Tyler Banks leaned against his motorcycle, smoking nervously. He was younger than most Shadow Serpents, his leather vest still stiff with newness. This is messed up, man, he muttered his snake tattoo, and two other gang members admired their handiwork. Guys in a wheelchair. We should be helping veterans, not. Shut it, Prospect. Snake tattoo spat on the ground. You want to be one of us? This is how we handle disrespect. What disrespect? He hasn't done anything. That's the point. Blaze's voice made them all turn. The gang leader emerged from the alley like a bad dream. He acts like we don't exist. Like we're beneath him. Can't have that kind of attitude in our town. But, Tyler started. Blaze grabbed him by the vest. He's an easy target. Get over it. Unless you want a hand in that vest. Tyler looked down. No, boss. Good boy. Blaze released him. Now watch and learn how we handle things around here. Meanwhile, Ryan had retrieved cleaning supplies from his apartment. His movements were methodical as he scrubbed at the graffiti, but his eyes missed nothing. The spray paint was Montana Gold brand, high-end stuff. The footprints in the dust showed at least 5 people. One set stood apart from the others. Newer boots, different stride pattern. The reluctant member, probably. He also noticed other details. The way the letters were formed indicated a right-handed painter with experience in graffiti. The height of the writing suggested someone around 6 feet tall. Small details, but details kept you alive in his former line of work. Let me help, Mrs. Patterson offered, reaching for a brush. I've got it, Ryan assured her. But thank you. It took over an hour to clean the wall. By the time he finished, his arms ached and his shirt was soaked with sweat. But the surface was clean, almost like it had never happened. Almost. That evening, alone in his apartment, Ryan sat by the window watching the street below. The secure phone sat on the table beside him, Logan's words echoing in his mind. The fight will find you. He wheeled to his closet and pulled out a locked case from the back. Inside lay the tools of his former trade. Encrypted laptop, surveillance equipment, tactical gear modified for wheelchair use. He hadn't opened this case in 18 months. The coin from his unit gleamed on his desk, next to the photograph of his team. In the picture, they looked invincible. Now 3 were dead. 1 was in a wheelchair, and the rest were still fighting shadows while he played chess with children and packed care packages. What am I doing here? He whispered to the empty room. The answer wasn't simple. He'd chosen this life for a reason. Chosen peace over violence. Chosen to help people instead of hurting them. The Veteran Center meant something. Teaching Evan meant something. Being part of a community meant something. But now that community was under threat. The Shadow Serpents were growing bolder, and it wouldn't stop with graffiti. He'd seen their type before in different contexts. Men who mistook cruelty for strength, who fed on fear and submission. Ryan wheeled to his window again. Somewhere out there, the gang was probably celebrating their latest act of intimidation, probably planning their next move. They thought they had found an easy target, a broken man who couldn't fight back. They were half right. He was broken in some ways. The explosion had taken more than just his ability to walk. It had taken his sense of purpose, his clear direction. For 18 months, he'd been drifting, telling himself he was finding peace when maybe he was just hiding. But broken didn't mean helpless. Sometimes broken things had sharp edges. His phone buzzed, the regular one this time. A text from Lila. Evan was asking if you're okay. He wants to finish your chess game tomorrow. Ryan stared at the message for a long moment. Then he looked at his reflection in the window. Not the wheelchair-bound veteran the town knew, but the man he'd been before. The man who could end this situation quickly and violently. But violence had a price. He knew that better than most. Every life he'd taken, justified or not, had left its mark on his soul. Did he want to go back to that? Did he want to risk becoming that person again? The alternative was to stay passive, to let the Shadow Serpents continue their reign of terror, to watch them hurt people who couldn't fight back, to see fear in Evan's eyes, in Lila's, in the faces of everyone who had welcomed him into their community. No easy answers came. Ryan sat in the darkness, wrestling with choices he'd hoped never to face again. The secure phone seemed to mock him from the table. One call to Logan and he could have resources, intelligence, everything he needed to solve this problem permanently. But that would mean crossing a line he'd drawn for himself. Violence was like gravity. Once you started falling, it was hard to stop. Outside, a motorcycle roared past, a deliberate taunt. They were watching his apartment, probably hoping to see his reaction to their artwork. Instead, they saw only darkness and silence. Ryan's hand found the military coin, fingers tracing its familiar edges. The man who had earned this coin knew exactly what to do in this situation. The man in the wheelchair, he wasn't so sure anymore. Tomorrow, he would go to the Veteran Center. He would help pack care packages, teach chess to Evan, be the person this community thought he was. But tonight, in the privacy of his own thoughts, Ryan Mitchell allowed himself to remember who he had been and wonder who he might need to become again. The coin spun on his desk, glinting in the moonlight like a question without an answer. When it finally fell flat, Ryan was still sitting in the darkness, watching the street below, thinking about choices and consequences and the price of staying passive in the face of evil. The night grew older, and somewhere in Cedar Grove, the Shadow Serpents plotted their next move, unaware that they were poking at a sleeping giant. Whether that giant would wake. That was the question that kept Ryan awake until dawn, his mind full of memories of violence and dreams of peace, unable to decide which path to choose. In the end, maybe Logan was right. Maybe the fight would find him whether he wanted it or not. The fluorescent lights of Walker's supermarket hummed overhead as Ryan maneuvered his wheelchair through the produce section. His shopping basket balanced carefully on his lap, already containing the essentials he'd come for: bread, coffee, canned soup. Simple provisions for a simple life. Mrs. Chun was by the tomatoes, carefully selecting each one with practiced care. She gave Ryan a quick, nervous smile before hurrying away. Word of the diner incident had spread through town like wildfire, and people were starting to give him a wide berth. He was reaching for a bag of apples when he heard them, multiple boots on linoleum, moving with deliberate purpose. Ryan didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The Shadow Serpents had been following him all morning, making their presence known without being obvious about it. Shopping for one? Blaze's voice came from behind him. Must be lonely, eating all your meals by yourself. Ryan continued selecting apples, checking each one for bruises with careful precision. Four gang members moved to surround him: Blaze, Snake Tattoo, Bear, and a younger member he didn't recognize. Kind of rude to ignore people, Snake Tattoo said, stepping directly into Ryan's path. Didn't your mama teach you manners? Excuse me, Ryan said quietly, trying to wheel around him. Bear's massive hand shot out, knocking the basket from Ryan's lap. Apples rolled across the floor, bread landed with a soft thud, and the coffee jar shattered, spreading dark granules across the white tiles. Oops, Blaze leaned down, his face inches from Ryan's. What's a cripple gonna do about it? Ryan met his gaze steadily. Nothing. Just like you're going to do nothing else. Because we're in public, with cameras, and you're not quite stupid enough to risk assault charges. The smile fell from Blaze's face. He straightened up, glancing at the security cameras mounted in the corners. Then he grinned again. Boys, help the gentleman clean up his mess. Snake Tattoo and Bear began kicking the fallen items, scattering them further. The young gang member stood back, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. A store employee started toward them with a mop, but one look from Blaze sent him retreating to the safety of the stockroom. Have a nice day, Wheels, Blaze said, deliberately stepping on an apple as he walked away. Watch out for falling groceries. Ryan waited until they left before beginning to gather his scattered items. A teenage girl stepped forward to help, but her mother quickly pulled her back, whispering, "Don't get involved." Outside the store, the Shadow Serpents mounted their bikes. Ryan could hear Blaze's voice carried on the morning air. "That's just the beginning. By the time we're done, no one in this town will even look at him." The town square was busy with its usual mid-morning activity when Ryan wheeled through an hour later. The farmer's market was in full swing, local vendors selling produce and crafts from wooden stalls. Children played by the central fountain, while parents chatted nearby. The peace shattered with the roar of multiple engines. The Shadow Serpents appeared from different directions, converging on the square like wolves circling prey. There were more of them now, at least 10 bikes, their riders wearing the gang's colors. They began circling Ryan, engines revving, creating a wall of noise and intimidation. People quickly backed away, pulling their children close. Some took out phones to record the scene, but most simply looked away, pretending not to see. Round and round he goes. Blaze's voice carried over the engine noise. Where he stops, nobody knows. Ryan kept wheeling forward, his pace steady, his face impassive. The bikers tightened their circle, forcing him to stop or risk being hit. "What's wrong, Wheels?" Snake Tattoo called out. "Getting dizzy?" A crowd had gathered at the edges of the square, watching with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Ryan recognized faces: Joe from the diner, Mrs. Patterson, teachers from the elementary school. No one stepped forward. No one said a word. The bikers continued their circling, drawing closer with each pass. The sound was overwhelming, not just the engines, but the laughter, the jeers, the squealing tires on pavement. Ryan sat perfectly still, like the eye of a hurricane. His hands rested calmly on his wheels, his posture relaxed. Only his eyes moved, tracking each rider, noting details. Who rode what bike, who favored their left side, who seemed hesitant. Finally, perhaps frustrated by his lack of reaction, Blaze called off the show. The bikers roared away, leaving behind the acrid smell of exhaust and burned rubber. The crowd quickly dispersed, avoiding Ryan's gaze. He noticed Mrs. Chun hurrying into her flower shop, flipping the open sign to closed as she went. The Veteran Center was quiet that afternoon. Ryan was organizing files when he heard the commotion outside. Lila's voice, raised in fear, and Evan's frightened cry. He wheeled to the window in time to see Blaze and 3 other Shadow Serpents surrounding Lila and Evan in the parking lot. Evan clutched his chest set to his chest, tears streaming down his face. "It's a simple message," Blaze was saying, his hand gripping Lila's arm. "Tell your friend to stay in his lane, or else things might get unfortunate. Let go of my mom." Evan tried to sound brave, but his voice shook. Blaze looked down at the boy, his grin wolfish. "Better teach your kid some manners, lady. Streets aren't safe these days. Is there a problem here?" Ryan's voice cut through the tension. He had wheeled out through the side door, approaching quietly. "Ryan, don't..." Lila began. "Just having a friendly chat." Blaze released her arm. "Making sure everyone understands how things work in this town." Ryan positioned himself between the bikers and Lila. "Evan, take your mother inside." "But..." "Now, please." Once they were safely inside, Ryan turned his attention back to Blaze. His eyes moved methodically over the gang members, cataloging details. Snake Tattoo had a new piece added to his neck, a dagger through his skull. Bear's vest showed fresh road rash on the left side, suggesting a recent fall. The youngest member, Tyler, he'd heard him called, had tension in his shoulders that suggested reluctance. "You've made your point," Ryan said quietly. "Have I?" Blaze stepped closer. "Because I don't think you're getting the message. This is our town. Everyone else lives here because we allow it. Is that what you tell yourself?" Blaze's eyes narrowed. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Sitting up there in your chair, looking down on everyone. Well, guess what? You're nothing. Less than nothing. And by the time we're done, everyone in this town will know it." Ryan said nothing, but his eyes never left Blaze's face. Something in that steady gaze made the gang leader step back, though he quickly covered it with a laugh. "See you around, Wheels. Give the lady my regards." Inside, Ryan found Lila trying to comfort a still crying Evan. The chest set had fallen, pieces scattered across the floor. "I'm so sorry," Lila whispered. "They followed us from school. I should have called." "It's not your fault." Ryan began helping Evan gather the chess pieces. "Are you hurt?" He grabbed Mom really hard. Evan's voice was thick with tears and fury. "Why didn't you stop him? Why doesn't anybody stop them?" Ryan met the boy's eyes. "Sometimes the right move isn't always obvious. Remember what I taught you about chess? About patience?" But Evan turned away, burying his face in his mother's shirt. Ryan noticed the bruises forming on Lila's arm where Blaze had grabbed her. That night, in his apartment, Ryan pulled out a worn leather journal from beneath a loose floorboard. Its pages were filled with diagrams, tactical notes, and mission details from his military days. He began adding new information, descriptions of each gang member, their habits, their weaknesses. Snake Tattoo favored his right side, suggesting an old injury to his left. Bear Size made him strong but slow. Tyler was the weak link. Young, uncertain, possibly exploitable. And Blaze. Blaze was smart enough to be dangerous, but not smart enough to know when to stop. Ryan worked late into the night, mapping the gang's movements, noting patterns. They had regular haunts, the bar on 5th Street, the abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Their numbers were growing, but their discipline was loose. They relied on fear more than actual strength. The next morning, Ryan wheeled into Joe's diner right as Blaze and his crew were finishing breakfast. The usual hush fell over the room as he approached their table. "Didn't expect to see you here," Blaze drawled. "Must be braver than you look." "Or dumber," Snake Tattoo added. Ryan positioned his chair at the end of their table. "This stops now." The gang members exchanged amused looks. "What stops?" Blaze asked innocently. "The harassment, the intimidation, all of it." Blaze leaned forward. "Or what?" "Or you'll find out exactly what a cripple can do about it." For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered in Blaze's eyes. Then he grinned and swept his arm across the table, sending Ryan's plate crashing to the floor. "Looks like what a cripple can do is clean up another mess." The gang's laughter filled the diner. Ryan backed his chair away from the table. "Last warning." "No." Blaze stood up, looming over him. "This is your last warning. Next time we run into your friends, well, accidents happen." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Ryan wheeled himself out, aware of every eye in the diner avoiding his gaze. Even Joe had retreated to the kitchen, unable to watch. Over the next few days, Ryan noticed the change in town. People crossed the street when they saw him coming. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. Parents hurried their children away. At the Veteran Center, attendance dropped. The regulars made excuses, doctor's appointments, family obligations. Only the most desperate still came for help, and even they kept their distance. "It's not personal," Marcus the security guard tried to explain. "People are scared. They've got families to think about." Ryan understood fear. He'd seen it in war zones across the world. The way it could turn neighbors against each other, make good people look away from evil. Fear was the Shadow Serpent's real weapon, more powerful than any threat of violence. But it was Evan's fear that finally broke something loose inside him. The boy came to the center one afternoon, alone, his chest set clutched in trembling hands. "Mom said I shouldn't come," he admitted, setting up the pieces. "Said it's not safe. But I needed to know why you won't fight back. You were in the army, right? You know how to fight." Ryan watched the boy arrange the pawns with shaking fingers. "Fighting isn't always the answer, Evan." "Then what is?" Evan looked up, tears streaming down his face. "They're hurting people. They hurt Mom. They hurt Mrs. Chun and Joe and everyone. And you just sit there." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Ryan reached for Evan, but the boy backed away. "I thought you were brave," Evan whispered. "But you're just scared like everyone else." After Evan left, Ryan sat alone in the center, surrounded by half-packed care packages and empty chairs. Through the window, he could see the Shadow Serpents riding past, a deliberate patrol to remind everyone who owned these streets. His hand found the military coin in his pocket, fingers tracing its familiar edges. In his mind, he heard Logan's voice. "You can leave the fight, but the fight will find you." Well, the fight had found him and everyone he cared about in this town. He'd tried peace, tried to be the better man. And where had it gotten him? watching a 9-year-old boy cry because the adults in his life were too afraid to stand up to bullies. Ryan wheeled to the window, watching the bikers disappear around the corner. His reflection showed a man he barely recognized anymore. Not the warrior he'd been, not quite the peaceful veteran he'd tried to become. "No more," he whispered to the empty room. The words felt like a door closing, or maybe opening. He'd drawn a line for himself 18 months ago, chosen to walk away from violence. But sometimes violence didn't give you a choice. Sometimes it came looking for you, threatened your friends, hurt people who couldn't fight back. The sun was setting over Cedar Grove, painting the sky in shades of red. Somewhere out there, the Shadow Serpents were celebrating their victory, confident in their power over this small town. They had no idea what they'd awakened. Ryan touched the coin one last time, then wheeled himself toward home. There was work to be done, plans to make, skills to remember. The peaceful man in the wheelchair had tried his best. Now it was time to let the warrior back out. The veteran center stood quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, its windows dark except for the security lights, casting weak pools of illumination in the parking lot. Inside, boxes of donated supplies waited to be sorted: clothing, toiletries, gift cards, and letters of support from the community. What little Cedar Grove could spare for those who had given everything. The rumble of motorcycles shattered the silence. The Shadow Serpents emerged from the darkness like demons, their headlights cutting through the gloom. Blaze led the pack, his chrome-studded leather jacket reflecting the security lights as he dismounted. "Remember," his voice carried in the still air, "make it look random. Just another break-in." Bear's boot made short work of the front door, splintering the frame with a single kick. The alarm began to wail as the gang poured inside, their laughter mixing with the sound of breaking glass and splintering wood. "Check this out." Snake Tattoo's voice echoed from inside. "Care packages for broken heroes." The sound of boxes being thrown and supplies scattered filled the air. A window shattered as someone threw a chair through it. The destruction was methodical, purposeful, not the random vandalism of bored thugs, but a message written in wreckage. Ryan arrived just as they were finishing, his wheelchair moving silently through the shadows. He watched as they emerged, carrying armfuls of stolen supplies. "Look what I found." One of the younger members held up a stack of gift cards. "Christmas came early. Burn the rest," Blaze ordered, lighting a cigarette. "Let's show these do-gooders what we think of their charity." The gang was so focused on their destruction, they didn't notice Ryan until he spoke. Those supplies were for homeless veterans. The gang members spun around. Blaze's cigarette glowed in the darkness as he smiled. "Well, look who decided to join the party. Our favorite wheelchair warrior." He strolled toward Ryan, taking a long drag. "Come to make another speech about stopping?" Ryan's eyes moved over the destruction. Scattered supplies, broken furniture, spray-painted obscenities on the walls. Months of donations and community support, destroyed in minutes. "No speeches," Ryan said quietly. "Just a reminder that actions have consequences." Blaze's smile vanished. With surprising speed, he stepped forward and drove his fist into Ryan's face. The punch knocked Ryan backward, toppling his wheelchair. He hit the ground hard, but there was something odd about the way he fell. Too controlled, too practiced. "Consequences?" Blaze stood over him, laughing. "Here's your consequence, tough guy. Learning your place the hard way." The gang gathered around, their shadows falling over Ryan as he lay in the parking lot. But their laughter died as a small figure darted out of the darkness. "Leave him alone." Evan's voice cracked with fear and fury. He had been cutting through the parking lot on his way to early morning chess practice, his board clutched to his chest like a shield. "Evan, go home," Ryan called out, but the boy stood his ground. Well, Blaze's grin turned predatory. "The kid's got more spine than you do, Wheels. Maybe we should teach him about consequences, too." "Touch him." Ryan's voice changed, becoming something hard and dangerous, "and there won't be enough left of you to bury." Something in his tone made Blaze step back. The moment passed quickly, covered by forced laughter. Big words from a man who can't even stand up. Blaze kicked Ryan's wheelchair, sending it skittering across the pavement. "Come on, boys. Our work here is done." The gang mounted their bikes and roared away, their laughter echoing in the night. Evan ran to Ryan's side, tears streaming down his face. "Why didn't you fight back?" he sobbed. You let them hurt you. You let them destroy everything. Ryan pulled himself into a sitting position, his movements precise despite the fall. Come here, Evan. The boy fell into his arms, his small body shaking with sobs. Sometimes, Ryan held him close, you have to pick the right moment. Like in chess, you don't take every piece as soon as you can. Sometimes you wait, let your opponent think they're winning, until the perfect move presents itself. Evan pulled back, wiping his eyes. You're going to do something, aren't you? Go home, Evan. Tell your mother you're sick today. Stay inside. Something in Ryan's voice made the boy nod. He retrieved the wheelchair and helped Ryan back into it, then disappeared into the growing dawn light. In his apartment, Ryan moved with newfound purpose. He went to his bedroom and pulled out a small wooden box from under his bed. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay his unit coin, the symbol of everything he'd been, everything he'd tried to leave behind. He lifted the coin to his lips, kissing it gently. Time to wake up, he whispered, slipping it into his pocket. The hidden compartment was exactly where he'd left it 18 months ago, concealed behind a false panel in his closet. The combination lock yielded to practiced fingers, and the door swung open with a soft hiss. Inside lay the tools of his former trade, carefully preserved. Tactical gear modified for wheelchair use. Communications equipment that could tap into any frequency. Surveillance devices that could track movement and record conversations from hundreds of yards away. Weapons, carefully maintained and legally registered, but deadly in the right hands. Ryan began laying out the equipment with military precision. Each piece had a purpose, each tool a specific role to play. He'd been the best for a reason, not just because of his combat skills, but because of his planning, his attention to detail. The next few hours were spent in focused preparation. Ryan set up a command center in his living room, multiple screens showing different parts of town. He'd had cameras in place for months, not because he was paranoid, but because old habits died hard. The Shadow Serpents patterns emerged like lines on a map. They had regular routes, favorite haunts, predictable behaviors. Bear always took the same way home, passing the same blind spots. Snake Tattoo liked to drink at O'Malley's bar until closing, stumbling out alone at 2 a.m. Even Blaze was creatures of habit, holding court at their clubhouse every evening from 8 to midnight. Ryan noted it all, building a comprehensive picture of their operations. The clubhouse was their center of gravity, an old warehouse on the edge of town. They had lookouts, but the security was lazy, comfortable in their perceived invincibility. Their weakness was their arrogance. They'd grown too confident, too sure of their control over the town. They never considered that someone might be watching, planning, waiting for the right moment. As the sun set, Ryan made his final preparations. He wrote a note in block letters. Walk away while you still can. Simple, direct, a courtesy they didn't deserve but protocol demanded. Moving through town in darkness was easier than most people would expect. A man in a wheelchair didn't draw attention, and Ryan had learned long ago how to be invisible when he needed to be. The clubhouse was noisy, music and laughter spilling out into the night. Ryan approached from the blind side, noting the single-board lookout more interested in his phone than his surroundings. Slipping the note under the door was almost too easy. Inside, the party continued for several minutes before someone noticed the paper. Ryan, watching from the shadows, saw it pass to Blaze. The gang leader's face contorted with rage as he read it. Who the hell thinks they can threaten us? Maybe it's that guy from the Veterans Center, one of the younger members suggested. The cripple? Blaze laughed, but there was an edge to it. Nah, he's not that stupid. He pulled out his lighter and set the note ablaze, letting it burn in an ashtray. But whoever it is, they just signed their own death warrant. The gang cheered, raising bottles and making threats. But Ryan noticed something interesting. Tyler, the youngest member, hanging back from the celebration, his face troubled. Listen up, Blaze's voice cut through the noise. Tomorrow, we show this town who runs things. No more playing nice. No more warnings. Anyone steps out of line, they get hurt. Anyone helps them, they get hurt worse. More cheers, more threats. But Ryan had seen what he needed to see. The note had rattled them, made them angry. Angry people made mistakes. He wheeled away from the clubhouse, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost. Behind him, the Shadow Serpents continued their celebration, unaware that they were no longer the predators in Cedar Grove. In his apartment, Ryan began the final phase of his preparations. The tactical gear felt familiar as he checked each piece. The weapons were cleaned and loaded, each one chosen for a specific purpose. The surveillance equipment was positioned for maximum coverage. Tomorrow, the Shadow Serpents would learn what it meant to threaten the wrong man. They thought they'd been poking a crippled veteran, someone who couldn't fight back. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous. A man who'd spent his life learning how to hurt people who thought they were untouchable. The military coin sat on his desk, its surface catching the moonlight. Ryan picked it up, feeling its weight, the weight of all the violence in his past, all the skills he tried to leave behind. Last chance to walk away, he whispered, though the gang couldn't hear him. But he knew they wouldn't take it. Men like Blaze didn't walk away. They pushed until something pushed back harder. Well, they were about to learn about pushing back. Ryan Mitchell, the broken hero in the wheelchair, was done being passive. Done watching his community suffer. Done pretending to be less than he was. The coin slipped into his pocket like an old friend coming home. Outside, the night grew deeper, and somewhere in Cedar Grove, the Shadow Serpents celebrated what they thought was their victory, unaware that their reign of terror was about to meet something far more terrifying than anything they could imagine. The war was about to begin, and only one side knew it was coming. Ryan wheeled to his window, watching the town he'd grown to care about. Tomorrow, everything would change. Violence would return to his life like a bad habit picked up again. But sometimes violence was the answer. When reason failed, when threats went too far, when good people were hurt by those who understood nothing but force. He'd tried peace, given it 18 months of his life. Now it was time to remind the world why he'd been the military's most lethal combat specialist. The Shadow Serpents were about to learn that some wheels crush anything in their path. The abandoned warehouse district was silent, except for the low murmur of voices and the occasional crunch of gravel under boots. The Shadow Serpents had gathered for their weekly supply run, a major deal with their drug suppliers from the city. Blaze stood with his lieutenants while the rest of the gang waited by their bikes. None of them noticed the shadow moving silently between the buildings, or the careful hands that had been at work hours earlier. "Package is en route," Snake Tattoo reported, checking his phone. 10 minutes out. Blaze nodded, lighting a cigarette. Everyone mounted up. Standard formation. No mistakes tonight. This is big money. The gang members swung onto their bikes, engines roaring to life in the darkness. Or at least, most of them did. Bear's massive chopper coughed once and died. Then Snake Tattoo's bike sputtered and stalled. One by one, the motorcycles fell silent. What the hell? Blaze kicked his own bike as it refused to start. "Check the tanks. They're full," someone called out. "But something's wrong with the engines. They're completely dead." Panic began to spread through the gang. Without their bikes, they were stranded, and their suppliers were minutes away. "Call it off," Blaze shouted into his phone, but there was no signal. Someone had set up a signal jammer in the area. From his vantage point in the shadows, Ryan allowed himself a small smile. Amazing what a little water in the fuel tanks could do, especially when mixed with the right chemicals. The bikes wouldn't run again without major repairs. The suppliers arrived to find chaos. A gang of bikers without bikes, arguing amongst themselves about sabotage and betrayal. The deal fell through immediately. No one trusted a crew that couldn't keep their own equipment running. That was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the Shadow Serpents found messages everywhere they went. Cryptic notes appeared in their private spaces, details about their operations, their personal lives, their secrets. At O'Malley's bar, Bear found a napkin under his beer. Asked Snake about the missing money from last month's protection runs. In Snake Tattoo's locker at the gym. "Wonder what Blaze would think about your side deals?" On Blaze's motorcycle seat. "Your crew is falling apart. Just like your father's did." The messages were precise, targeted, designed to sow doubt and paranoia. Each one referenced things only an insider should know. Ryan watched through his surveillance equipment as the gang began to fracture. Trust disappeared. Every sideways glance became suspicious. Every private conversation, a potential betrayal. Then the takedowns began. Marcus, the security guard at the Veteran Center, arrived one morning to find 2 gang members tied up in the parking lot. They were alive but thoroughly subdued. Pressure points hit with surgical precision, joints locked with expert knowledge of human anatomy. 3 days later, the police found Snake Tattoo's lieutenant behind O'Malley's bar, zip-tied and unconscious. A USB drive tucked in his pocket contained records of every protection racket the gang had run in Cedar Grove. Each takedown was different, but they all showed the same expertise. No serious injuries, no excessive force. Just clinical efficiency that spoke of advanced military training. It's him. Snake Tattoo paced the clubhouse, paranoid. The guy in the wheelchair. He's not what he seems. Don't be stupid, Blaze snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. How's a cripple going to do all this? The final touch was the supplier situation. Ryan had been gathering evidence for weeks. Documentation of the Shadow Serpents skimming from shipments, selling on the side, cutting their product. He made sure it all reached their suppliers through untraceable channels. The response was immediate. The suppliers cut ties, demanding repayment for alleged theft. Other criminal organizations in the region began treating the Shadow Serpents with suspicion. Their reputation crumbled. Tyler watched it all with growing unease. The young gang member had joined looking for belonging, not this chaos of paranoia and violence. He found Blaze alone in the clubhouse one night, drinking heavily. "This has to stop," Tyler said. "We're tearing ourselves apart." "Shut up." Blaze hurled his bottle against the wall. "You think I don't know what's happening? Someone's playing us, making us look weak. Maybe we should leave town, start fresh, somewhere else." Blaze's hand shot out, grabbing Tyler's vest. "You want to run? Like a coward?" Tyler pulled away. "I want to live. Can't you see what's happening? He's picking us apart." "He? So you think it's the cripple too? Who else could it be?" "Think about it. The military precision, the intelligence gathering, the tactical expertise. We pushed him too far." Blaze released him with a shove. "Get out. And if I hear you talking like this to anyone else." The threat hung in the air. Tyler left, his decision made. The next day, he wheeled into the Veteran Center during Ryan's chess club hour. "I want to help," he said simply. Ryan studied him for a long moment. "Why?" "Because this isn't what I signed up for." Blaze is losing it. He's talking about burning down buildings, hurting kids, anything to draw you out. "And you think helping me will make things better?" Tyler looked down. "I think you're the only one who can stop this before people get killed." Ryan nodded slowly. "Tell me everything." The information Tyler provided was invaluable. Guard schedules, hideout locations, personal weaknesses of key members. Ryan added it all to his growing intelligence network. The Shadow Serpents began to implode. Members disappeared or quit. Those who remained jumped at shadows. Blaze's leadership grew more erratic, his decisions more desperate. "He's watching us," he ranted during a gang meeting. "Always watching." "Well, let him watch this." He smashed a chair against the wall. Bear shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, maybe we should." "Should what?" "Run away, because some guy in a wheelchair is playing mind games." Blaze laughed manically. No, we're going to show this town what happens when someone challenges us." But his crew was no longer the united force they'd been. Paranoia had done its work. Every shadow held a threat, every whisper a potential betrayal. Through it all, Ryan maintained his routine at the Veteran Center. He played chess with Evan, helped with care packages, kept his cover intact. But people noticed a change in him, a new confidence, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. Evan especially picked up on it. One afternoon, after checkmating Ryan for the first time, the boy grinned. "You're different now," he said. "Stronger. Like a superhero." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" "Things are happening to the bad guys. They're scared now. And you're not scared at all anymore." Evan leaned forward. "It's you, isn't it? You're fighting back, just like you said you would." "Sometimes the best moves aren't obvious at first," Ryan replied carefully. "Just like in chess." Evan's eyes shone. "You let them think they're winning, but really you're setting up your attack." Ryan couldn't help but smile. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, reminding him why he'd chosen to act. Not for revenge, but to protect people like Evan, the innocent ones who deserved a town free from fear. The final confrontation was inevitable. Blaze, driven to desperation by the systematic dismantling of his gang, made his move. The message came through Tyler. A piece of paper slipped under Ryan's door, written in Blaze's angry scrawl. Enough games. Face me like a man. Tomorrow night. Warehouse District. Come alone, or I start burning down this town with people inside. Below the message was a crude drawing of a wheelchair in flames. Ryan read the note twice, then added it to his intelligence file. Blaze was unraveling, becoming more dangerous. The time for subtle warfare was ending. Are you really going? Tyler asked nervously. Of course. Ryan wheeled to his window, watching the street below. A cornered animal is the most dangerous. Better to face him on our terms than wait for him to hurt innocent people. But he'll have backup, no matter what he says about coming alone. Ryan's smile held no warmth. I'm counting on it. That night, as Cedar Grove slept, Ryan began his final preparations. The tactical gear came out of storage. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Surveillance equipment was positioned for maximum coverage. The military coin sat on his desk, catching the moonlight. Ryan picked it up, feeling its familiar weight. The Shadow Serpents had wanted a war. Now they would learn what it meant to face a real warrior, one trained in the darkest arts of combat, honed by years of classified operations. They thought his wheelchair made him vulnerable. They were about to learn that some predators don't need to stand to be lethal. The specialist was fully awake now, and Cedar Grove would never be the same. The Shadow Serpents clubhouse reeked of desperation and stale beer. Blaze paced the floor while his remaining loyal members watched nervously. Their numbers had dwindled. Barely a dozen left from what had once been a fearsome gang. He thinks he's so smart. Blaze's voice was thick with rage. Playing his little games, turning us against each other. Well, tonight we show him what happens when you mess with the Shadow Serpents. He spread a crude map of the Veteran Center across a table stained with cigarette burns. The place runs on donations, right? Helping broken soldiers. His laugh was bitter. Let's see how many vets they can help when it's nothing but ashes. Boss, Bear shifted his massive frame uncomfortably, burning down a veteran center. That's going to bring heat we don't need. Blaze wheeled on him. You worried about heat? After everything that's happened? Our suppliers won't talk to us. Our protection rackets are drying up. Half the crews either disappeared or quit. And it's all because of him. But nothing. Blaze slammed his fist on the table. He'll try to stop us. That's what I'm counting on. When he shows up to play hero. He drew a finger across his throat. Snake Tattoo grinned, touching the knife at his belt. No more wheelchair warrior. Exactly. Blaze pointed to locations on the map. We hit it from all sides. Gasoline through the windows, block the exits. Once it's going good, he'll show up. Then we finish this. What they didn't know was that Tyler had slipped away during the planning, making a call from behind the building. They're coming tonight, he whispered. Planning to burn the place down? How many? Ryan's voice was calm. 11, including Blaze. They got gasoline, weapons. Good. Stay clear of the center tonight. Whatever you hear, whatever happens, stay away. Ryan had been preparing for this moment. The Veteran Center might have looked unchanged from the outside, but inside it had become a carefully crafted trap. He worked methodically through the afternoon, his military training guiding every decision. Fishing line across doorways at ankle height. Pressure plates under loose floorboards. Flashbang grenades modified to trigger remotely. Every entrance covered. Every approach monitored. The security cameras he'd installed showed empty streets, but he knew that would change. The Shadow Serpents would come under cover of darkness, thinking they had surprise on their side. What he didn't expect was the small figure that slipped in through the back door just before sunset. Evan had come for his forgotten chess set, using the spare key his mother had for volunteer work. The boy froze when he saw Ryan working. What are you doing? Evan, you need to leave. Now. Are the bad guys coming? Evan's voice trembled with excitement and fear. Are you going to fight them? Before Ryan could answer, engines roared in the distance. Multiple motorcycles, getting closer. Hide, Ryan commanded. Storage closet in the back. Lock the door. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Evan ran as the first bottles crashed through the windows, Molotov cocktails that sparked and flared. But Ryan had prepared for this. The floors had been treated with fire-retardant chemicals. The flames sputtered and died. Go, go, go. Blaze's voice carried from outside. The Shadow Serpents charged in through multiple entrances, exactly as Ryan had predicted. 3 went down immediately, tripped by the fishing line, falling hard on strategically placed obstacles. Ryan, watching from his command position in the security office, triggered the first flashbang. The explosion of light and sound filled the main hall, sending 2 more gang members stumbling, disoriented. "It's a trap!" someone shouted. "Find him!" Blaze's voice rose above the chaos. "He's here somewhere." Ryan moved silently through the building's back corridors, his wheelchair's wheels professionally silenced. The gang members were splitting up, exactly as he'd planned, dividing their strength, making themselves vulnerable. He found the first one in the east corridor. A quick strike to a pressure point, and the man dropped without a sound. Zip ties secured him quickly. 2 more came around a corner, weapons raised. Ryan's hands moved with trained precision. A thrown baton took one in the throat. As he fell, gasping, his partner's gun hand was caught and twisted. The crack of breaking bone was followed by a zip tie. "Where is he?" Snake Tattoo's voice carried from nearby. "This is impossible." "What's impossible?" Ryan's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. That a man in a wheelchair could fight back? That your little gang could be beaten by someone you thought was broken? A crash from the storage area made his blood run cold. "Evan." Ryan wheeled rapidly through his planned route, taking down another gang member with a precisely thrown knife that pinned his sleeve to the wall. The man's scream was cut short by a strike to the jaw. He found Blaze and Bear outside the storage closet, the larger man trying to break down the door. Come out," Blaze called. "We know someone's in there." "Hey." Ryan's voice drew their attention. "Looking for me?" Bear charged first, his massive frame filling the corridor. Ryan waited until the last moment, then triggered his last flashbang. As Bear stumbled, blind and deaf, Ryan's wheelchair shot forward. Years of training had taught him to use his wheelchair as a weapon. Its solid frame slammed into Bear's knee with precise force. The big man went down howling. "Enough games." Blaze fired his pistol, the shot going wide. "Face me like a man." "I am." Ryan's voice was cold. "You're the one hiding behind guns and numbers." More shots, more misses. Blaze's fear was making him sloppy. Ryan wheeled into view, his face calm. "Just you and me now, Blaze. No gang. No backup. Just a broken man in a wheelchair." Blaze screamed and charged. Ryan waited, timing it perfectly. At the last moment, he spun his chair, using Blaze's momentum against him. The gang leader sprawled across his lap, and Ryan locked him in a hold that no amount of struggling could break. "You know what the difference is between us?" Ryan's voice was conversational as Blaze thrashed helplessly. "You think being broken makes you weak. I learned that broken things have edges." "Kill me then." Blaze spat. "Prove you're the bigger man." Ryan increased the pressure slightly, feeling bones grind. "You're not worth it. The only reason you're still breathing is because death would be too easy. You're gonna live, Blaze. Live and watch everything you build crumble." He released the hold with a sharp twist that left Blaze gasping on the floor. "It's over. Your gang is finished. Your reputation is destroyed. And everyone will know it was done by a man in a wheelchair." Blaze tried to reach for his fallen gun, but Ryan's will rolled over his hand, grinding it into the floor. "Stay down," Ryan advised, "or I'll show you exactly how lethal a broken man can be." The storage room door cracked open, and Evan peeked out. "Mr. Ryan? Is it safe?" "Come here, buddy." Ryan held out his arm, and Evan ran to him. "You okay?" The boy nodded against his chest. "That was amazing. You were like a superhero." "Not a hero," Ryan said quietly. "Just someone who remembered who he was." Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Tyler must have called them. "Evan, I need you to do something for me. Tell them you hid in here when you saw the gang breaking in. You didn't see what happened to them. Can you do that?" The boy nodded solemnly. "Because superheroes have secret identities, right?" Ryan smiled. "Something like that." When the police arrived, they found an extraordinary scene. 9 gang members incapacitated with military precision. Blaze and Bear secured with zip ties. Evidence of their attempted arson scattered everywhere. And in the middle of it all, a disabled veteran and a young boy, calmly playing chess as if nothing had happened. The official report would be full of questions. How had a group of hardened criminals been so thoroughly defeated? Who had set up the elaborate traps? Why were the gang members too terrified to talk? But Ryan knew the truth would stay hidden. The Shadow Serpents would never admit they'd been taken down by the man in the wheelchair. Their reputation was destroyed, their power broken. Cedar Grove would be safer without them. As the last police car pulled away, Evan looked up at Ryan with shining eyes. Will they come back? Ryan touched the military coin in his pocket, feeling its familiar weight. No, buddy. They won't. Good. Evan moved his knight. Checkmate in 3 moves. Ryan examined the board and smiled. The boy was learning. Sometimes the best victories came not from strength, but from careful planning and patience. Just like tonight, the morning after the Veteran Center showdown, Cedar Grove's police station buzzed with activity. Officers processed the arrested Shadow Serpents while Detective Sarah Martinez interviewed Tyler in a small conference room. And you're sure about all this? Martinez spread photographs across the table. Protection rackets, drug deals, assault victims. Every word. Tyler's voice was steady. I've got dates, locations, recordings. Everything you need to make it stick. Through the window, they could see Blaze being led to processing, his face a mask of fury. You're dead, Tyler. You hear me? Dead. Martinez closed the blinds. He won't be threatening anyone for a long time. With your evidence and testimony, we're looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. Tyler watched as more gang members were brought in. Bear limping, Snake tattoo with his arm in a sling, others showing evidence of their encounter with Ryan. None of them would meet Tyler's eyes. What about the Veteran Center? Tyler asked. About what happened last night? Martinez smiled. Officially? A gang assault interrupted by their own incompetence. Seems they triggered their own booby traps. At least, that's what the disabled veteran who was there reported. Strange how he managed to protect himself and the boy without leaving his wheelchair. They shared a knowing look. Some stories were better left in the shadows. Cedar Grove came alive that afternoon. News of the Shadow Serpents' arrest spread quickly. People gathered in the town square, sharing stories, expressing relief. The fear that had gripped the community for so long began to lift like morning fog. Did you hear? Mrs. Chun was saying to anyone who would listen. They found evidence of everything. All their crimes. Good riddance, Joe growled from his diner doorway. Town's better off without them. Someone suggested a celebration. Tables appeared in the square, loaded with food. Music played. Children ran and played freely for the first time in months. Ryan watched from the periphery, content to remain unnoticed. But people kept glancing his way, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. They knew something had happened at the Veteran Center, even if they didn't understand exactly what. Lila and Evan found him there, carrying a covered dish and an envelope. Mom made your favorite. Evan bounced with excitement. Meatloaf with extra gravy. And this is from all of us. Lila handed him the envelope. Inside was a simple card signed by dozens of townspeople. The messages were heartfelt. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for being here. You don't have to stay on the sidelines, Lila said softly. People want to thank you properly. Ryan smiled. This is enough. More than enough. Evan hugged him suddenly. I knew you were a hero, even if you can't tell anyone about the cool stuff you did. Ryan ruffled the boy's hair. The real heroes are the ones who stand up to bullies every day, even when they're scared. Like you did, the Veteran Center became a hub of activity over the next few days. Volunteers poured in to help repair the damage from the gang's attack. Joe organized a fundraiser at his diner. Mrs. Chun donated flowers for the entrance. The hardware store provided materials at cost. Even the mayor showed up, talking about community grants and future support. Ryan stayed in the background, watching as the center was transformed by the community's gratitude and determination. Quite a change, a familiar voice said behind him. Ryan turned his wheelchair to face Logan, who stood in his usual tactical casual wear, cargo pants, and a plain black t-shirt that didn't quite hide his shoulder holster. Didn't expect to see you here. Logan shrugged. Heard there was some excitement. Thought I'd check on an old friend. He surveyed the bustling center. Nice work, by the way. Clean, professional. Just like the old days. That's not who I am anymore. No. Logan's eyes twinkled. Seems to me you just proved exactly who you are. A warrior who protects people, He pulled out a business card. The unit's changing, Ryan. More advisory roles, less direct action. We could use someone with your experience. Your perspective. Ryan studied the card. I have commitments here. It's part-time consulting. You can do most of it remotely. Keep your life here, but stay connected. Stay sharp. Logan smiled. Besides, your recent operation proved you haven't lost your touch. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. Logan turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Ryan? Good to have you back in the game, even if it's just part-time. The center's renovation continued at a rapid pace. New security systems were installed, donations poured in, and volunteers signed up in record numbers. Among them was Tyler, who appeared one morning looking nervous but determined. I want to help, he said simply. If you'll let me. Ryan studied the young man. Gang life's behind you? Completely. I'm enrolling in community college next semester. But I want to give back, make up for some of what we did. Start with the care packages. Marcus will show you how we organize them. Over the next few weeks, Tyler proved himself reliable and hardworking. The other volunteers were wary at first, but his genuine desire to help won them over. Ryan watched his progress with quiet satisfaction, recognizing the signs of a life being rebuilt. One evening, after most volunteers had left, Ryan sat by the window, watching the sunset. The military coin gleamed in his hand as he reflected on the changes in his life. 18 months ago, he'd come to Cedar Grove seeking peace, trying to leave violence behind. He thought being a warrior meant only destruction, that the only way to help people was to completely change who he was. But the past weeks had taught him differently. Sometimes fighting was necessary. Sometimes the warrior's path was the path of protection. The trick was knowing when to fight and when to show mercy, when to act and when to wait. The center had become more than a place for veterans. It was a symbol of community resilience. People came not just for help, but to help others. Tyler worked with homeless vets, teaching them job skills. Lila organized support groups for military families. Even Joe started a weekly coffee meetup for veterans to share stories and support. And through it all, Ryan found a new balance. The warrior and the caregiver, the protector and the teacher, different aspects of the same whole. The next afternoon, Evan arrived for their regular chess game. The boy had improved remarkably, his tactical thinking growing sharper with each match. Mom says you're going to help train people, Evan said, setting up the pieces. Army stuff. Ryan nodded. Part-time consulting. Teaching others what I've learned. But you're staying here, right? There was worry in the boy's voice. Of course. Cedar Grove is home now. Someone has to keep teaching you chess. Evan grinned. I almost beat you last time. Almost doesn't count in chess. Or in life. Ryan moved his first pawn. Your move. The boy studied the board with intense concentration, just as he had during their first game. But now there was confidence in his movements, strategy in his choices. Ryan watched him, feeling a deep satisfaction. The Shadow Serpents were gone. Their reign of terror ended. Cedar Grove was healing, growing stronger. And he had found his place in it all, not just as the quiet veteran in the wheelchair, but as someone who could make a difference. The military coin sat in his pocket, no longer a reminder of what he'd lost, but a symbol of who he was, all of who he was. The skills that had made him a lethal combat specialist could also make him a protector, a teacher, a force for good. Checkmate in 5 moves, Evan declared confidently. Ryan examined the board and smiled. The boy was right. He'd laid a subtle trap, positioning his pieces so carefully that Ryan hadn't seen it coming. Well played, he said. Want to try again? Evan's face lit up. Always. As they reset the board, Ryan looked around the restored veteran center. Volunteers worked with purpose. Tyler helped a homeless vet fill out job applications. Lila led a support group in the next room. Through the window, he could see Cedar Grove going about its business, free from fear. This was why he'd fought, not for glory or revenge, but for moments like this. For a community where children could play chess without fear, where people helped each other, where even former gang members could find redemption. He touched the coin in his pocket one last time, then turned his full attention to the game. Your move, he said to Evan, and in those 2 words was everything he'd learned, about patience, about timing, about knowing when to act and when to wait. about being both the warrior and the teacher, the protector and the friend. The boy moved his pawn, beginning another game, another lesson. Outside, Cedar Grove continued its peaceful afternoon, unaware of the quiet guardian who had chosen to make it his home. Some battles were fought with violence, others with patience and wisdom. Ryan Mitchell had learned to use both, finding his own kind of peace in the balance between them. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Have you ever witnessed someone discover hidden strength in themselves when others needed them most? Share your story in the comments below. If this tale of redemption and justice touched you, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow's story will take you inside another small town where an unlikely hero is about to prove that appearances can be deceiving. Don't miss it.